Hi, this is Dan. I'm here at Long Beach Comic Expo 2019 with Troy Lee Hudson, who is an instrument engineer with JPL. Kind of talk about some of the stuff they have going on with the InSight mission that he's currently working on. So Troy, tell us a bit about the mission and where you guys are right now.
Well, InSight is different from a lot of the other Mars missions in that we're looking not at the surface, not at the atmosphere, but deep inside Mars. And so we have a set of special instruments, a seismometer and a heat flow probe, that allow us to do that. But a special thing about those is they have to not be on the spacecraft, they have to be on the ground. And so we have a robotic arm that has been placing them on the ground or going through that process for the past few months. So we're just about near the end of that process right now. And once that's done, we'll start listening for Mars quakes, and our heat flow probe is going to start drilling into the surface. And
what time period do you expect that to start happening?
Well, the drilling will start in about a week and a half, so around the end of February. The process itself will take between 40 and 50 days to get all the way to our final depth. During that time, the seismometer is doing some calibrations of its own. And so around March, late March, early April, we should have all our instruments in place and be ready to listen for Mars quakes, take its temperature, and start learning about the interior.
Now, the instruments, are they robots themselves, or?
Well, they're
like stationary, where they don't move around?
Well, they're certainly stationary. The entire lander is stationary, except for the arm. We don't have wheels. We don't rove around the surface. I mean, the heat flow probe is literally nailing us to the ground, and the seismometer wants to be on a very steady platform, so that all it senses are the motions of Mars, not the motions of a roving spacecraft.
Got it.
So, I mean, the instruments are very sophisticated electronics devices, and sensitive scientific measuring, but I wouldn't call them robots in their own right.
Not like Opportunity.
Right. Well, I mean, InSight as a spacecraft is a robot.
Okay.
I mean, it's got power generation and telecommunications and all kinds of housekeeping data that it does. It's not very smart, but then neither was Opportunity. It relies very heavily on the ground, Earth, telling it what to do. And it can handle some small faults and issues on its own, but anything of it significant import, or even to just be told, what do you want us to do the next day, has to come from us.
Now, we talked briefly about the InSight, and you've done some awesome stuff in the past. What project would you love to be a part of in the future?
I've already started coming up on a new project, designing a new suite of instruments to do life detection. So, I mean, if you're familiar with the Star Trek tricorder model, where you go, I'm getting life signs, Captain, there's no technology to do that. There's no thing you can sense that says this is alive. It requires a much more elaborate suite of looking for things like proteins, amino acids, carbohydrates, looking for cells with microscopy. So I'm working on this project to build a prototype instrument. We'll take it up to the Arctic, sip some glacier water, and see if we sent something like this to Europa, would we be able to use it to look for life there? So that's it's a very frontier pushing sort of observation. It's nothing like it we've ever done before. So I'm really excited about that because it's a little bit different from, I mean, my background is in geology.
Okay.
But this is a whole lot of chemistry and biology that I'll be working with. And it's fun. It's something new.
Two different types of sciences as opposed to what you're normally used to.
Yeah, I mean, my background is in geology. I've really found my calling in doing instrument engineering, instrument systems engineering.
Okay.
Because to do that, you really need to speak both the language of engineering and science. And often those two camps don't talk to each other very well. Scientists want to know what's there, what measure everything. And the engineers are like, no, I need requirements, I need a box, I need to fit inside the box. So negotiating between those two is a challenge, and I'm uniquely placed, I think, to be able to do that.
Now, say you have the chance to be part of a colonization project on any planet or moon in the solar system, not counting Mars, since you're already all over that, what would you pick?
It depends on the goal of the mission. If it's just to explore, Titan, I think, is probably an incredible, the moon of Saturn, that has hydrocarbon lakes and seas. It has rain, but rain of methane and ethane. It's a very unusual place, but has a lot of eerie similarities to Earth in that it's got rivers and mountains and lakes and clouds, but they're all made of methane and ethane.
So a whole different composition.
A whole different composition. It's a whole different chemistry. how life might exist on a world like that would be, a completely different sort of issue from ours. I mean, we've got tons of water and not a lot of organic material. That's got tons of organic material and not a lot of water. So I think that probably has one of the most interesting and most easily accessible, just bizarre and fun places to go.
Got it. Now, I noticed on your Twitter, and you go by the nickname of Space Daddy.
Science Daddy.
Sorry, Science Daddy. My mistake, sorry.
That's quite all right.
How does embracing that play at work?
How does embracing what?
The nickname play at work.
Oh, well, I mean, Daddy is sort of a term of, I consider it a term of endearment within the gay community. And I, it's a moniker that people have used on me before. And somebody, one of the Twitter fans who saw me after the landing just said, "Who's that hot daddy who works for NASA?" And somebody else came up with the idea of calling it Science Daddy. I'm like, you know what? That's branding. I'm going to run with that. It struck a chord, and I like it.
And you kind of just went with it from that point on. Yeah. Now, I know you're not a big comic book fan, as we talked about briefly before we started. You are into graphic novels. What about comic book-based movies?
Well, I mean, I've enjoyed the Avengers series, and quite a few other, comic-based movies of various sorts. I'd say that my favorite science fiction are things that are a little bit more hard sci-fi as opposed to fantasy sci-fi. So, like Contact, for instance, or I guess dramatizations like Apollo 13, or like Sunshine until it got really weird at the end. I mean, this is my job. I loved The Martian, for instance. I had lots of nits to pick.
Because that's your background.
Yeah, but I mean, unmanned spacecraft don't have on switches. So I kind of took, there are little things like that I took issue with. I hated the movie Interstellar. So it really depends. And it's in cases where, I'm fine with, sci-fi conceits like warp drive or the fifth dimension or teleportation. If that's, what you're assuming for the sake of the story, fine. And if it's like Borderlands science, like what happens inside a black hole or what happens in other dimensions, fine. Run with it. Poetic license. Go ahead. It's where we should know better, like just simple like high school physics.
Things that are so impossible to happen.
Well, it's like, I mean, I liked Star Trek The Next Generation, but it's like, oh, come on, guys, this is the 8th particle you've invented this season. And it's like the second law of thermodynamics says no. Things like that where you could have written it in a way that is physically accurate and still dramatically interesting, but there's not a lot of science review in such things. And I think the reality of space and space exploration is incredibly exciting and interesting and beautiful. It's not necessarily good television because things take a long time, most of the time. But I still think there's some beautiful things to say there.
Now, I know you mentioned you're a fan of the Avengers movie. Do you think Thanos could have been defeated in Infinity War if someone had punched out Star-Lord?
Yeah, that was a really, really stupid move on his part. And I think that, characters hoisting themselves by their own petards is just like, oh, come on. It's annoying. So, yes.
And are you excited for the last chapter of Infinity War?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it'll be fun.
Yep. And what's the next big movie that's coming out that you're looking forward to?
Honestly, I'm looking forward to the next season of The Expanse.
Okay.
And I've heard that Amazon has considered optioning Consider Plebis, which is the first culture novel by Ian M. Banks, and it's one of my favorite science fiction series, and I think it would be amazing. Oh, David Villeneuve's Dune.
Okay.
I'm really keen on that, because I've been a big fan of Dune forever.
And everybody who other's signed to join the movie is just name after name after name after name.
Freaking fantastic. I just hope they get the story right, because, I mean, when the sci-fi version came out, I watched the first couple episodes of it, and I couldn't stomach it, because, like, the Fremen and living on Dune, it's all about how precious water is. And they've got people sitting there in a tent with doors flapping in the wind like it's Lawrence of Arabia. I'm like, where's your water discipline? You're just like, they totally miss that aspect of the story. So I hope that they're much more true to the text.
Okay.
Like Peter Jackson, Lord of the Rings. I mean, they made some poetic license changes to that, but overall they were true to the development of those, and that's what I love. Dune, Lord of the Rings. What's another? Oh, Game of Thrones.
Okay.
I love complex alternate universes with deep histories and rich mythologies.
With a long background of setting the story up, introducing each of the characters.
Yeah, and even just a ton of stuff that never even makes it into the story. But you read like the appendices or the extra materials, and you're like, or the history and lore videos they're put out around Game of Thrones. It's like, this stuff isn't really mentioned directly, but it's essential to the story, and I just love how much thought has been put into that.
Like the Silmarillion. I'm probably mispronouncing
I love
it.
the Silmarillion.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I read
And
that
they
thing cover to cover like 5 times.
Yes, which Peter said a few times would be too complex to try to get to a movie. He wants to do it, but it's just so complex.
It's really complex, and I mean, I like watching documentaries. The Silmarillion would essentially be a documentary, which I think would still be really cool, but fantasy documentaries, that's an interesting genre that hasn't really been tapped.
And are you excited for the Lord of the Rings Amazon series? Or,
I have not heard of such.
oh, sorry. Maybe I got it. Maybe I'm getting my genres messed up. I know there's an Amazon series coming up. And I thought it was Lord of the Rings, but I could be mistaken. I'm going to check it in a few minutes. If not, I'll just edit this part out. And then lastly, going back to, I know you mentioned briefly the LGBT community. How has the work environment changed, work culture changed since you've been there in that area?
Oh, well, I mean, I've been out to my colleagues at work since I joined JPL 10 years ago. It usually doesn't come up the first time I meet someone, but eventually, if they work with me closely, they'll learn that I'm gay. It'll come out in conversation one way or another. Maybe I'm very lucky in this, but I've never experienced any, negativity from the people I work with professionally, whether it's been in school or working at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. JPL actually has a pretty active LGBTQ community, and they have worked closely with JPL and Caltech for many years, making sure that we were sort of at the forefront of things. We had domestic partner benefits at JPL before domestic partnership was even a thing back in the 90s.
Nice.
Of course, I wasn't there then, but a lot of people who are still there laid that groundwork. I think fewer people that I work with know that I'm part of the leather fetish BDSM community, but because that doesn't normally come up in our work conversations. But if it did, it's not an issue. It's just it's who I am, and those worlds, they intersect in me. But I don't. When I'm at work, I'm doing science. I'm doing engineering. When I'm out at a bar or out at a dance club, I'm doing that.
Yeah, two different worlds.
Well, although I will say, introducing myself to somebody and they're asking, what do you do? I'm like, I work for NASA. It makes really good cocktail party conversation because people always want to hear about what I'm doing. And I love that because I love talking about my work. I love talking about science. I love communicating science. Carl Sagan is a big hero of mine. And the way that he was able to express the beauty and wonder of the universe without dumbing it down for anybody.
Like the original Cosmos series.
Exactly. That I aspire to be that sort of communicator.
Got it. And any last words for our listeners?
Just so my primary instrument on InSight was the heat flow probe, which has just been deployed and is about to start its actual job of digging into the surface. We did a lot of testing and a lot of design work on this, but it's still possible that we might run into a rock that's just too big for us to get around. That would be unfortunate, and I'm nervous because we've done everything we could. We landed in an area with very few rocks. We put it on the surface where we didn't see any rocks. It's still the case that it might hit something and not, but I'm really excited to see how it's going to perform. So this next month or two is going to be really exciting for me.
And where can people follow the mission online?
Yeah, so NASA, if you just search NASA Mars InSight, you'll find the main NASA page. They have Twitter and Facebook accounts. I have my Twitter account at Troy Lee Hudson. And then the videos that I post there, I also post on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Science Daddy. And there's a Reddit feed, actually, a subreddit called InSight. Lander and or InSight Mars, something like that. It's the InSight subreddit, and I contribute to that, and there's lots of really great discussions and questions on there. So if anybody has any questions about the mission, they can ask me a question on Twitter or send something up on that Reddit, that subreddit.
Nice. Well, thank you for your time today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for the questions.
Thank you.